Has anyone, well, you newbies, have you seen Guy Needler speak before? Yeah, okay, yeah, all right, okay. Oh, okay. I gotta get my breath back after that. Okay. Oh, right. Guy, okay, I'm trying to think how long you have been with us, Guy. 2010. So that really? Yeah. Well, I know. Really, that seems like, okay, wow. But really, I'm sitting there going, I was thinking it was longer than that. Because when you think about how many books he has, I mean, this man has just been cranking them out. And every time we get together, he's like, oh, I'm like 80,000 words in my next book. And I made it. And I'm like, and what I because we just have this little friendly competition. Because I know I have assignments to write more books, and he just listens better than I do.
I'm told off on a regular basis.
Yeah, he got hit with a napkin the other night when he was told that. Anyway, so that's just kind of a thing we do. And but that's, just constantly. Those books are just cranking out. Bam, bam, bam. But his books, I like to tease him because they're not for the faint of heart. The first ones especially. He had one in there that was kind of I think just one, and that was the karma one. that was little lighter.
Standalone.
Yeah, it was out there on its own. All the rest are really, they're deeper. And I still joke, if you think convoluted universe, I always said, that's the deep end of the pool. The convoluted universe books are the deep end of the pool. His books are the ocean. Okay, it's deep, okay? And he started with the history of God. Okay, that's kind of deep stuff. Okay, but then it doesn't stop there. Oh, let's just go beyond God. Okay, see, sometimes that takes a little bit to wrap your mind around, right? You mean there's something more than God? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then there's something beyond that. Really? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, okay. And that's what he does. He just keeps going beyond and beyond. Oh, yeah, there's source, and beyond the source, and beyond, okay, what's next, and beyond that. And it's like, so that's what I mean. It's the ocean. How deep can we go? Okay. And then his latest book is, oh gosh, come on.
It was supposed to be based upon a similar subject to everybody else has done, but it ended up being a bit deeper than that.
I was trying to be here and light, and they just went right here. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, and it's because of who it is. His latest book is, well, you'll explain it, but it's called the And Dialogues. And that is where he wrote this with his recently departed wife, okay? And that one just went, oh. So, but anyway, I'm just wide open. I'm telling you, something happened earlier, and okay. So anyway, okay, we're going to be, but anyway, he's talking on he's going someplace else today, but anyway. But all of these, and you'll probably talk a little bit about what this is about And Dialogues. Would you do that?
Yeah,
okay, that'd be good. But anyway, because that's a very exciting subject, because it's something that we all want to know about. Anyway, Anne is right here. Just like Joanne was here earlier and Mom was here earlier. They're just all right here. And they're just, okay. Oh. Guy started out. I mean, this is one of the stories, I don't know how much of your history you go into right on these talks now that you've been doing this so much, okay? I mean, he wasn't a woo-woo person when he started all this. He was an electrical engineer, you know? And then the universe came and said, okay, bam, that's not where you're going to be anymore, you know? And anybody else have that experience? Yeah, it happens, you know? And they're like, okay, nope, that's not your path anymore. You're over here. And, you know, and they turn regular, you know, all these, you know, professional types and stuff, and they pull you up and they put you over here in this woo-woo spiritual world among all these really weird people. Yeah. And then you're in here singing and dancing and going, what on earth am I doing in here? And you're channeling and you're doing all this weird stuff and going, what is happening to me? Well, that's kind of what happened to Guy here. And now he's one of us woo-woo weirdos. So anyway, yeah. And we can take that, can't we? We don't mind being called woo-woo weirdos, right? Because no, we have our feet on the ground and we know what we're doing. So here's a fellow woo-woo weirdo, Guy Needler, all the way from the UK.
Thank you. I have a saying that today's metaphysics is tomorrow's physics. Well, today's woo-woo person is tomorrow's civilization. This book wasn't intended to be made or written or even channeled. I was starting to work, I was finishing the book called The Origin Speaks, and I was getting really into the energies associated with that. And then right at the end of The Origin Speaks, my late wife Anne came through saying, we've got to work together. There's a whole group, a whole bunch of information surrounding the incarnation process that isn't understood and isn't known and needs to come forward. And I was a little bit resistive, to be honest, because I mean, we've done the incarnation process so many times with so many different books and so many different authors. I thought, well, what's the point? But I sort of capitulated and carried on in the joyful air of being able to communicate with my late wife again. And was really quite surprised at the level of detail that was coming out almost from page one. So I decided that the thing to do was to let it run and see what happened. And there's lots of different things in here which are really quite in depth and with the amount of work that we do and the things that we do in the background to support our incarnation and the helpers that we've got. I mean, the network of helpers that we've got is immense. You know, if you think of the number of individuals on Earth alone, and then times that by a multiple of maybe over 100, that's the sort of individuals who are working with us whilst we're incarnate. Within this book, there was a section on what the ego is, hence the presentation. And initially it started out as the chapter, and then I got the intuition that it was supposed to be more of an article, so I ended up presenting it on my website as a blog, as an article. And then it got published by Kindred Spirit magazine in the UK. And then I was invited to do a number of different lectures in different conferences, and I thought, well, I've done all the previous material, I need to sort of do something else. And then I was feeling a bit lazy, and then I saw my article about what the ego is and how it affects us, and I thought, well, that's useful. So basically, this is last year's work, and I'm being lazy. And so what we're going to do today is to have a bit of fun of it as well. But the ego is something that actually we think we understand, but we don't. And this is the whole part of this. So we're going to have a little bit of interaction as well, because it's quite funny. So we're going to find out what a common definition of the ego is. I think we already know that. Then we're going to find out what it really is, and how it's created and how it affects us, and how we can battle with it, how we can make it... we're never going to remove our ego, but how are we going to sort of help it go in the background a little bit more? And then we'll do some questions and answers. So I'll ask you all a question. What do you think the ego is? Yeah? Okay, shout up if you can.
It's a mask.
It's a mask. Okay, anybody else?
My separated self.
My separated self, okay.
It is the protective, emotional self that tries to keep the spiritual self separate.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else?
The part of us that thinks the movie is real.
Well, sort of. It wants to keep the movie real. Okay, so we've got a few things here that I've picked out. In general, this is more of a human understanding of what an ego is. It's the people, we tend to think people who've got a big ego are people who think a lot of themselves. They're very ambitious, very status-driven, they like a lot of material wealth. And they're generally not in control of their thoughts, behaviours or actions, but they really want to promote themselves on quite a regular basis. And so these people are considered to have sort of big egos. They're larger than life. And the word ego is an old word that's actually there to describe the personality. So think of the ego as being just another way of describing the personality. And the personality is something that's created as a result of our incarnation, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So people who have little or no ego, hence the little or no script, okay, tend to be a bit reserved, don't they? They're introverts. They don't talk to people too much. They apparently are quite happy with their role in life. They don't have much ambition. They don't tend to have a lot of material wealth around them, although some, you could argue, would like to have the material wealth. But in general, they're quite quiet. They stay in the background, and they don't interact with people too well. But in both of these conditions, it's interesting to note that it's the ego that controls our daily incarnate lives, whether we're larger than life or whether we are simply very mouse-like in the background. It's the size of the ego that tells us what type of control the ego's got on us. Okay? Spiritual individuals tend to be sort of in control of their ego, but that's not always the case. So at the end of the day, it's the ego that's got control of us. But if the ego's in control of us, what is it? I've just mentioned before, it's the personality. But in actual fact, it might be something else. So let's explain. So the ego is something that is created, as I've previously stated, as a result of incarnation. And so incarnation creates the ego. There's a series of mechanics surrounding this, and I'll go through it in a moment. But in essence, every one of you now is transient. You only exist for the length of time your physical body exists. That's scary, isn't it? Because we've all been told that we live forever. Well, we do, and I'll explain more about that. But this bit of us, that's the ego, that's the controlling factor that takes over the animation of the body, where the soul should be doing it, but is doing it, is something which is a bit strange to us to understand. So it's created as a result of our soul, what I'm told to call the aspect of our true energetic self. The true energetic self is that larger part of us, which is sort of still disincarnate. The Hindus call it the Godhead. Dolores called it the Oversoul. It's the same thing. It's that big part of us that's still there. I point upwards because it's higher frequency, not because it's high up in the heavens. And the smaller part of us is sort of projected down. So it's to do with being away from what we are. And so the aspect of who and what we are is projected into the lowest frequencies. Okay? Now, why do we project our aspect or a soul into the lowest frequencies? Why are you here? Yeah, to experience. Yeah, actually, the answer's up there. But it's to experience, to learn, and evolve. And this is important because by placing ourselves in the lowest frequencies of our multiversal environment, we put ourselves in challenging conditions. Okay? We lose most of who and what we are. We are, for all intents and purposes, separated from what we are. We no longer have the communicative bandwidth that we had, the ability to communicate with soul, true energetic self, source, and other entities that are individualized from source. We no longer are able to understand what things are, concepts, how they work, and how to create. So we're separated. So where we are here is really, hard work. Yeah? It's like a mouse learning how to get from one end of the maze to the other end of the maze without having the ability to look down on the maze and say, okay, I'm going this way now, and that way, and that way, and that way. We're moving and working in a really restricted, constrained way. Think of how hard it is to work underwater. If any of you have been a diver, it's really quite hard to move around, isn't it? Your sight starts to go into monochrome very quickly. The body is difficult to maneuver around. We have to breathe with assistance to help to work down there. But our hearing is still maintained. So we lose most of our senses. It's difficult to exist. We can't exist without having an aqualung. So the body is like an aqualung. It's the ability for the soul to experience, learn and evolve in a low frequency and challenging, but nevertheless evolutionary, accelerating way. So, how is this ego created? Okay? How does this temporary personality, because that's what it is, created? Well, to experience this evolutionary acceleration, the aspect, the soul, okay, we use the soul because that's what we understand, but the soul, in religious terms and in most spiritual terms, we think the soul is all we are, but actually the soul is just another word for the aspect, and the aspect is a smaller version of what we are. It's like an octopus's arm being sort of projected down into some other part of the pool, so to speak, where the bigger part of it remains is the head. So we have to enter into these frequencies, this environment, okay, and experience them in a way which is conducive to being how they should be experienced, i.e. by experiencing resistance with extremely low levels of frequency, by experiencing the difficulty in interacting with people who are also experiencing difficulty with interacting with people and their environment. And so we have to be being here to experience it in the way it's supposed to be experienced. So to do that, the soul, or the aspect, needs to associate itself with its swimming suit, okay? Its diving suit. A vehicle. This particular vehicle, which isn't too bad actually, it's going quite well for its age, you know, looking after it. Although I've put a few pounds on in the past 2 years, but I'm still okay. I try not to associate myself too much with that, by the way, if you noticed. So it associates itself with a vehicle that it can animate energetically. That means it's able to control it using its intention, its desires. And this particular instance, for us, right now, in this incarnation, it's the human body, or the human form as I've called it there. Because in the rest of the physical universe, in the various different frequencies associated with it, there are lots of other different form factors that we work with and use. Okay? We sometimes call them aliens, although that's not the right word, I don't think, these days. They're just another form of body that we incarnate into, another incarnate vehicle. Okay? Right. So what I'm going to do now is explain the mechanics of incarnation in a very sort of high-level way to allow us to understand how the ego is created. Well, this nice little ball, purple ball, it's purple. Okay? It's purple. Okay? This represents our true energetic self. Okay? The oversoul, higher self, or Godhead in Hindu texts. It's that bigger part of us, that vastly huge part of us which remains disincarnate. And it projects a smaller aspect of itself into a vehicle to allow it to experience, learn and evolve in the environment it wants to experience, with the things it wants to experience with, and the individuals it wants to experience those things with as well. And so what happens is we move part of ourselves, this is talking from the perspective of the true energetic self, into a small energetic tube that's classified as the Hara line. Okay? Very small. And we go down through a series of step-down functions. And so the energies above the auric layers and the chakras, the energies above the 7th frequency levels, the 8th, 9th and 10th, start to funnel down those energies, which also funnels down and creates a significantly reduced amount of communicative bandwidth. And so what happens is we start to move down further and further and further into the lower frequencies. And so we have this ability for part of us to go into the lower frequencies and experiences. The energy associated with the aspect moves down the Hara line, down the body, through an area close to the crown chakra, down towards an area that we call the Tantien, which is about 3 inches above the navel and 3 inches in towards the centre of the body. From there, the energy moves out. It starts to populate various different aspects of the meridians, and the minor chakras, mini chakras, and major chakras to allow the animation of the body. Okay? The smaller parts of the body, the larger parts of the body. And then something else happens. The sentience associated with that energy moves location. And it goes to a place sort of just behind the heart chakra. That's the blue part, by the way. Okay? This allows the sentience to move in and take a place. Now, Barbara Brennan calls this the soul seat, but it's where the sentience, where we really are, resides. So we don't live here. We live down here somewhere, actually. This is where our sentience is. This is just a translation medium. Okay. So this allows the animation of the human form. But what happens is, this energetic step-down function that occurs from being high frequency down to the lowest frequencies creates a condition where we lose almost all of our communication with our true energetic self. And it stays in that way whilst we are incarnate. Now think about it. If you consider that all of the air on the earth represents what we are, and then we get a party balloon, you know these rubber balloons you see on parties, kids' parties, and you blow that balloon up with air, and then you tie a knot, and you leave it in the corner somewhere of your house. Eventually that balloon will lose its pressure and go down. Now why does it do that? It does that because there isn't a perfect seal between the outside world, the inside of the balloon, and the neck of the balloon. Okay? The outside world is what we really are, our higher self. The air inside the balloon is what we now think of as the soul. But because it's almost totally cut off from the outside world, it starts to forget what it is. And the only little bit of communication it's got is through that leaking neck on the knot on the balloon. And so we have a condition where almost all of this communication is lost, or maybe it even goes down to zero at times. We start to create an individualization of the sentience that's there. We start to create a different personality, the ego. And so what happens is the ego, during the gestation of the body that's being grown on our behalf by our beloved mothers, okay, starts to associate itself with the energies. And so those energies that are part of the body, that were previously part of a bigger aspect of energy, that's projected a smaller aspect of its energy into itself, into another body, starts to think of itself as being individualized, alone, on its own. But it has an environment to live in, the human form. And so it thinks, I'm the human body. And so the personality grows associated with the human body. And so we start to say that our human body is what we are. And the ego, this temporary personality, associates itself with the human form, knows in the background that it only exists while the human form is in existence. So, how does this temporary personality affect us? Any ideas? Yeah? Horribly. Yeah? Makes us greedy, shy, concerned, angry, worried, fearful. What is the biggest thing that the ego gives us in our lifetime? Of death, exactly. Why does it fear death? Because it only exists for as long as the human body does. But we know that we live forever, don't we? But the ego keeps going, well, I don't live forever, but, you know, I'll put the fear of me into you so that you don't think of that. So what happens is that this ego is a temporary and transient condition that it only really happens to exist while the human form is in existence. Okay? It can't do anything else other than protect itself. Okay? Everything the ego does is to perpetuate its human form. That's why in times of stress, we perform miracles physically to get ourselves out of danger, to, if we've been injured, for instance, in a car crash or a plane crash, for instance, the ego does everything it can do to perpetuate the body existing. But there's another way of dying for the ego. And that's when we become self-realized. Okay? So the human form dies naturally because we want it to die eventually, because we get into this mindset where we're programmed to say the human body dies after about 312 or something, 72 years. If we're lucky, we have a bit longer. If we're unlucky, we might go a bit earlier, depending upon whether it's part of our life plan or not, and whether we've done our roles. But in essence, when the human form demises or dies, so does the ego. But don't worry too much, because this is a big problem. Okay? We think that when the ego dies then now, based upon what I've told you, that what we are, the personality, is gone. And so actually when the ego dies, and because the body's died, we've died as well. Now in the background, we know spiritually that we continue to exist forever, ad infinitum. That's correct. What happens is all of the experiential memories, sensory perceptions, experiences, knowledge, learning, all of our behaviours and everything we've worked on, still gets sent to our true energetic self and is recorded. So everything we've done is still available, including, in essence, the personality that's created as a result of our incarnation. Because it's part of what the soul is, temporarily, whilst it's incarnate. And so nothing is lost. So we do live forever. Well, we don't live, we exist forever. Okay, it's the difference between living and existing. And so we're always here. We're always here. We just sometimes decide to put a new body on and experience existence in a different and harsher way. But the ego doesn't know that. It's had so long, by the time we're 7, in general, to understand that it's the body that is what it is, and the body dies, it dies, that it does everything it can in its power to, in essence, stop us from doing anything that's going to threaten its own existence. And what that means is that the ego controls us even more. So what does that mean to us as spiritual beings? Do we let the ego run rife? Yeah? Do we let the ego run around with us, controlling us? No, we would try to work with the ego in a way that is conducive to being a more evolved individual, a spiritual individual, somebody who is caring and sharing and knows more about the environment and those individuals who work within the environment of the greater reality, and do well, and try to raise our frequencies and ascend to a different level whilst we're in our incarnate vehicle. But the ego knows this, because what happens when we work on ourselves spiritually? What happens to the ego when we work on ourselves spiritually?
The ego fights back.
It fights back, it does, good. That's one of the next slides further on.
It's tamed.
It's tamed. We think it's tamed, okay? Yeah? But if we were perfect in our ability to work on ourselves and ascend through the frequencies, we would move beyond this condition where we have, in the case of the balloon and the air, this little bit of air leaking out. So we start to untie the knot of the balloon, and more air leaks out and more air leaks in. And so we start to be in a better, a deeper communicative condition. We have greater bandwidth, so to speak, than we had previously. And so we start to see who and what we are. We start to be able to communicate with our true energetic self, communicate with Source, the cosmos. We know who and what we are. When this happens, poor old ego starts to dissolve. And so this is the if you like, part of the holy grail of being spiritual, to dissolve the ego. Because part of the ego, okay, is a function of us being low frequency. It's a function of us staying immersed in our incarnation, not being the spiritual being whilst here, not being in the physical, not being in the physical, but not of the physical. Okay. So the ego knows this intrinsically and does everything in its power to stay alive by staying in control for as long as it can. And so it works on us in all different ways. It knows that its maximum period of existence is associated with the length of time that the human body is in existence for before it demises. It accepts that, or sometimes it doesn't actually. If you think about all those doctors out there who are trying to work on longevity drugs and make us live into our hundreds, whilst our governments are trying to say, actually, you can't live that long, let's make you work a bit longer before you get your pensions. Okay? Okay? So I think maybe the ego is not working with the government at all. Although some of the government do have egos, clearly. Maybe they've got longevity that we don't know about. So anyway, what happens is the ego knows this. It knows its maximum existence is when the body's being animated. But it also knows that when we work on ourselves, when we start to look inwards and understand who and what we are, we can potentially dissolve it. Its existence can end early. And it's fearful of it. So it works hard on us, not working in our spiritual progression. Now, hands up, how many people have worked very hard on their spiritual progression and then sat back a bit? We've all done it, yeah? So the ego has made us think we've got there. And so it says, okay, you can have a rest now. Ha, I'll sneak in the back door and take control again. And that's what it does. It starts to use us against ourselves. Yeah? How many people have started to do things recently that they wouldn't have done? How many people have caught yourselves throwing sweet wrappers out of the car window on the freeway? Ah, yeah? Yeah. If we smoked, the cigarettes butt out the window, yeah? We would not normally have done that, maybe, but sometimes the ego takes over, and I shouldn't be doing this, but it's no problem. That's the ego sneaking in. The ego makes things feel okay. So from our perspective, look, moving away from the ego slightly, the whole point of being incarnate, apart from experiencing a different environment, a challenging environment and working with it, is to become spiritually self-realized whilst incarnate. And that means that we start to work on ourselves to the point where our frequencies are higher and we become self-realized in the process. What's self-realization? Understanding who we are. What's enlightenment? Knowing who we are and working with it. And so when we get into these positions where we are self-realized and enlightened, we are now communicating properly with our true energetic self, and the true energetic self is animating the human form through the Hara line and the Tantien and the soul seat and everything else. Not the ego, because the ego only existed while there was very little communication between the individualized, or should we say, isolated soul or smaller aspect of the true energetic self. So our goal, and you're all achieving these goals at various different speeds, is to work on ourselves to the point where we lift our frequencies, which enables the knot on the balloon to be undone. And so the air starts to pass through more freely. That air is the communicative ability of the soul with the true energetic self, which erodes the ego. So, while we do this, we resume communication with our true energetic self in the process. And it allows us to be in the physical, whilst not being of the physical. And this means that we sometimes appear to be detached. So for those individuals who are around us, who are working with us and who are fully immersed in our incarnation, it may appear to them that we are detached from them. We're aloof. We don't care what they're saying. We don't get engrossed or involved in what they're doing. But that's okay, because if we do, we start to get into conjecture. We start to work with them in terms of collusion. We bolster their egos, and then they start to work on ours in the background, and we start to come down the frequencies. So when we work with ourselves, we increase our frequencies. There's no room for the ego, and so it dissolves. And so we become our higher self, and we start to operate in a completely different way. We are totally aware of who and what we are, what everybody else is around us, and we accept them and work with them with no prejudices, no anger, no fear, no desires of manipulating them or getting gain from them. We're doing well with our spiritual advancement, aren't we? What's going on in the background? The ego's planning. It thinks, let's wait a bit. Let's let the soul think that it's winning the battle. And so it's patient, very sly, and super resourceful. And it uses all sorts of convoluted methods in all sorts of ways to trick us, to fool us, to make us think that we've mastered it. Who thinks they've mastered their ego? None of us. Okay? And so it's good that we've understood this, because if we think we've mastered the ego, that's when the ego is getting stronger in the background, and he can bite us on the backside like a very good dog. Okay? And so it fools us into thinking that we've mastered it. And it really does use our own spirituality against ourselves. Okay? And things like things like self-consciousness, failure, depression, success, materialism, status, pride, desire, need, want. They're all things that come into us when the ego is starting to attack us and win the battle with us, using our advancement against ourselves. Yeah? So in essence, what we have is that success and pride are predominantly the two emotions that the ego uses with skill, because they're a crossover function between the natural feeling of doing well in a material world, in a material existence, and feeling good about progressing in our spiritual advancement or evolution. But moreover, they are very dominant in our spiritual evolution. And they're the doorway, they're the chink in the armor that the ego needs to move forwards and take control again. So just when we think we've got it sorted, I'm a spiritual being, I'm a Zen master, I've got it sorted, yeah? Where's that ego? Okay? It comes around the corner and takes over. It is extremely good at using us against ourselves. Remember, the ego is temporary. We're not temporary, we're infinite. And so why would we want to settle for this temporary thing? But it instills fear into us, anxiety, concern, worry, lack of confidence, because it wants us to become the human being again, so it can take control, so it doesn't dissolve. How many of you feel good things about being spiritual? Yes. There's something called negative ego, which is when the ego uses our display of humility. I'm very humble. I'm very pleased. I've got this one. I'm very humble. I'm very grateful. A desire to be of service. Desire to receive no reward. Yeah, being over humble overly of service is a way that the ego sneaks in the back door and uses our negative ego against ourselves, because we start to feel pleased that we are humble, that we're Uriah Heep. I'm talking about the individual, not the 1970s group. Okay? So we have to be careful about this ego. It is really, really, really difficult to get a grip of. Slippery, it's slimy. Okay? It's like the slipperiest snake you've ever grabbed your hands on. Have any of you ever been fishing for eels or elva? Yeah? And something I did a long, long time ago. But try and grabbing these things, you know? You grab them and I thought I had a handful. Well, think of this as your ego. I've got a handful of ego here. I'm going to throw it out the door. What? It's gone. And that's what happens. It is so slippery and sly and resourceful and capable of using ourselves against us that we have a lifetime's battle against it. And this negative ego is one of the ways it really attacks us as spiritual people. It uses our humility, our desire to be of service, our want to be helpful to people, and raise ourselves to the frequencies against ourselves very effectively, actually. What about that? How many spiritual people have got the biggest egos you've ever seen in your life? I better get off the stage. Okay? I'm the messenger. Okay, that's all. Everybody's got an ego, yeah? And the problem is that when we are put into a condition or a position of power, yeah, spiritual leaders, governmental leaders, presidents, okay, chief executive officers of companies, medical directors of hospitals, it's all a way of the ego taking control. And having a group of people saying, "God, you're wonderful, you're great, I'm really following your stuff, I'm buying all of your books. Wow, it's lovely to hear, but boy, does it boost the ego." It's good. You know, you can go from being very self-conscious and, I'm going to make a right mess of this presentation today, to having a few people saying, "I really like your books. Oh, I feel great now." God. And all of a sudden you can perform well. That's the ego. Increases your performance, so there's a symbiotic relationship there as well. It uses us against ourselves. I'll keep saying this because it does. This feedback loop, this symbiotic loop, gives us the feeling of doing well, of being powerful, of being spiritual, of being humble, of being good. And that's how it survives. I've said this before, so this should have come earlier, again. This should have been 2 or 3 times actually in the presentation. But the very moment we think we've mastered this ego, we've lost the battle. It's got us, okay? Think of ourselves as being a mouse, looking in that trap. And in the corner, there's the tastiest bit of cheese we've ever seen. We think, I can go in there and grab that before the trap comes down. Okay? No, we will never be able to eat the cheese without getting our neck broken. Okay? So we will never be able to let go, okay, of our ability to be self-observant. Okay? We have to consider everything that's going on. We have to stay aware. Use the observer self. Susan Tsenga, in her book, several books actually, one of them being the Undefended Self, used an analogy of how we can move forwards. It's very 1970s and 80s actually, but it's actually very relevant today. Use your observer self. Consider yourself as being over there, observing yourself, and looking at how you're responding and acting. You know, do it in a loving and caring and neutralised way. Don't sort of kick yourself in the backside every time you do something wrong. But nevertheless, look at what's going on. Observe yourself in a passive and non-judgmental way and make a note of what you're doing, how you're responding with people, how you're moving forwards, how you're able to work with others, how you manipulate others, for instance, how they manipulate you, how you feel bad when they work with that. Look at signs that show the ego is coming back into the picture and act upon it. Don't be lured into the area where the ego says, it's okay to throw that sweet wrapper out the window. There's somebody down the road who's going to clear it up eventually. Yeah? I've been to India a few times, and they have an immense plastic problem over there. There's water bottles everywhere and all sorts of stuff, specifically where they're doing work on building new buildings. And I scratched my head, and I said to the lady who was looking after me at the time, I said, what's all this litter doing here? You know, this is a well-to-do environment. And she said, people just throw the litter down. I said, well, why? Why don't they just put it in a bin? Because it's somebody else's job to pick it up. We're doing them out of a job. Well, that's the ego, isn't it? That's the ego saying, it's okay to do that because it's somebody else's job. So when we start to move ourselves into those sorts of thought processes, it's somebody else's responsibility, not mine, then we start to lose control of ourselves and the ego sneaks back in again. So, in essence, no one, not even Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, okay, Confucius or anybody else, Yogananda, was safe from the ego. Nobody. No matter who you think they are, no matter how popular they are, no matter how revered they are, whether they're in the church, they're spiritual individuals who are in the background or in a prominent arena, none of them are safe from the ego. None of them are able to say that they're egoless, because the ego is a function of being incarnate. And when we get to the point of losing the ego, the physical body is either demised, or we've reached a level of self-awareness and enlightenment where we don't need to have the physical body anymore, and we dissolve it. Okay, that's it. Any questions? Stunned, he's finished. Yeah? Yes, please.
What about when Edgar Tolle says he has an ego, but he's disidentified from it? He doesn't believe it's him.
The ego's one. Yeah. Well, in essence, he's right, and he's wrong, because the ego is him. It's a part of what he is. But at the end of the day, if he hadn't got that ego, his physical body wouldn't be existing. Okay? So he can choose to try to ignore it and use his, I'm an advanced being, I've been enlightened and I've seen different things to justify it. But at the end of the day, the mere utterance of those words tells me that it's there still. Yeah? It's there still. And there will be things that will happen that will, I'm hoping he would identify as recognise that the ego snuck in the back door somewhere and it's having a go. Okay? There's nobody, absolutely nobody who's egoless. Okay? Any other questions? No? You're all afraid, aren't you, to talk about the ego? I could sense the energy when I came in and I've seen this word, ego. Myself. No, I didn't say my God, because we're all part of God. Yeah. Please.
This is more of a comment, really. A few times in my life, I've had the opportunity to kill my ego through shamans and other things like that, and it just keeps growing back. And every time it grows back, it gets a little angrier because I tried to kill it. So I stopped trying to kill it, and I was lucky enough in a very sober, very spontaneous experience where I was able to commune with my higher self or true energetic self, and being able to see that all the egos, or at least the memories of thousands upon thousands of egos, and being able to traverse this entire environment in this like giant sphere the size of Saturn, kind of quelled that for me, really. And it was more like, I'm not afraid to die anymore, because everything that I ever have been in every single human body or other vehicle experience exists still, that I can access at any time and be that, but be this whole entire thing. So that's how, I think the ego has won. I'm actually feeling a lot better about not, of just dying and being okay with that.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's a lot of what you're speaking of here.
Yeah. It's thank you. It's one of the biggest crowbars, okay, monkey wrenches that the ego's got on us is this fear of death. And when we have somebody saying that the ego is what we are, and when the physical body demises, and that's going initially against all of the spiritual teachings and understandings that we've all been taught or given or read, then we do start to get worried, and then the ego uses that knowledge against us. Now, we have to move beyond that thought process and go to the next level of understanding that everything is preserved. Even the ego, even the personality that is the ego is preserved. It's just it doesn't have control of us. Okay? When we go back into the energetic, we very quickly start to regain all of our functions, our abilities, our communicative faculties, the memories of all of the incarnations and other existences that we've had as an individualized aspect of our true energetic self. And so it's a bit like suddenly going back into a level of communion or regaining your memory once you've lost, if you've had amnesia, for instance. All these memories come flooding back. It's a bit like that. Whereas in this particular incarnation, you probably didn't know how to operate let's say a lathe in a workshop. In a previous incarnation, you would have done. And that knowledge comes back into you again when you go back into your energetic state. So we don't need to worry about this thing about the death of the ego. Okay? We don't need to worry about it dissolving and the physical body dissolving. Everything that we've experienced, have experienced, will experience, are going to experience, is preserved already. And that's the most important thing to understand. Thank you.
What do you think about making peace with your ego in the sense of giving it a new job?
That's collusion with the ego, isn't it? I think the ego's won. Yeah. I would be very careful of that because we can initially make peace with the ego, but we very slowly start to lose that, if you like, that observer self ability to work beyond the ego. And this is where the Eckhart Tolle comes into it, because he's trying to position himself into his observer self role and not the ego role, which is control in the human form. But eventually, when we start to think we've got, if you like, an agreement or a contract with our ego, that's when it's going to start taking over. And so our ability to be self-observant of self and ego would start to slowly erode and dissolve until we get back to our being the immersed, incarnate being in a human body that thinks it's the human body. So, yeah. Hi.
When you asked that question at the very beginning, the first image that popped into my mind was that of a periscope. And I'd never thought of the ego in that way before. First of all, I think that the ego is multifaceted, and so we can talk about it from all kinds of different angles. But when I thought about it as a periscope, I thought, wow, that's really cool, because it's like I'm a submarine, and I'm not sure exactly where I'm going, so I go up periscope so I can see what's up there, so I can see where I'm going. Obviously, I'm going somewhere, and obviously, I'm seeking something. I'm hungry for something. So in that sense, I think the periscope goes up looking for, in this case, spiritual food. And as I look about, it's who can I encounter, or what can I encounter that will feed that? Now, to feed the ego, would that be negative? And as I'm talking, I'm trying to do what you said earlier. I'm trying to step outside myself and look back and observe myself as like, why am I even, responding to your question? But it just seems, I feel like my ego is my friend because it's looking out there to see what's safe and what's not safe to encounter. So I think I'll just end it with that.
Wow. Well, when the ego's making you think in those ways, then the ego's also trying to sneak in the back door. If we use that analogy of being in the submarine, okay, and the periscope's up, the observer self is the person behind the periscope looking up. Okay, where are we? The ego is submersed, hidden, out of the way, with somebody else driving it. Now, the captain is usually the one in the periscope, isn't he? So the captain can be classified as being who we are, really, our soul. And the ego is driving the boat, keeping the submarine below water. The air is the higher frequencies. The sea is the lower frequencies. And so the ego wants to stay hidden, but cause a bit of damage every now and then. So it sets off the odd torpedo to sink a ship. Okay? Okay? And then what we want is to control the ego and let the submarine rise to the surface so we can make friends with those in the ships, but the ego wants to sink. So if you think of that in that analogy, okay, where the person behind the periscope is actually the observer self, trying to see what's going on, it still doesn't control the ego because the person behind the steering wheel in the submarine is controlling it. And that's where it is. So we have to try to convince, for as long as we can do, the person who's steering the submarine to come to the surface and start to enter into a meaningful dialogue with those people on the boat that the ego wants to torpedo. And try and keep it there as long as possible so that we can continue our lives with some level of control, so to speak, of the ego. Okay. So we have to be careful of the ego because it's always got plenty of things to do. Oh, sorry, down there.
I think I equate the ego with the game. If you think about the game.
The game?
The game. Then you've lost the game.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit like playing three-dimensional chess with the ego. Okay, if you concentrate too much on one level, you'll miss what's going on the level below. Yeah? If you think about Star Trek and you think about Spock always playing three-dimensional chess with Jim Kirk, Kirk always lost because Spock was thinking on the three-dimensional chessboard, whereas Kirk was always thinking on one level only. And it's a similar sort of thing. Playing with the ego or working with the ego is a game, but you can't take your eye off any part of it because that part is the one that will sneak in the back door. Okay.
I used to have a guru that I followed in India for several years, and he always said, kill the mind. And is that the same as
Killing the ego?
The ego.
Kill the mind. I know the Hindus sometimes say, kill the ego, forget everything, just meditate and become nothingness. And to some extent that does help to keep the ego at bay. Specifically if you're a hermit and you keep yourself into a place where you're not interacting with others. That's probably the safest thing you can do.
Think that was it. On a couple of occasions, for a few days, 2 different times, I would have no thought. And it was like I was just being played or something.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get back to that place, but I really don't know how to do it.
Simply be kind to yourself, but observe yourself on a regular basis. I think there's Jim over there, yeah. Behind you, okay, stay over there, yeah. You have to be kind to yourself, not beat yourself up, but really be neutral and passive and not judgmental, but record everything that happens that you think of as being egotistical, and make a note of it. And eventually you'll have a football pitch-sized list, okay? And then try to work with it and try to remove and govern and work on how you interact with yourself and with others and the environment and others in the environments that you work with. And just keep checking yourself. And it will start to come down to a level where you can keep control of it, but Don't take your eye off the ball, because it will come back. So it's very difficult. It is a difficult, lifelong exercise, without doubt. And all of us will slip numerous times during our incarnation. Yeah? But as long as we can keep coming back and recognizing it and working on ourselves, meditating, being of service, trying to divorce ourselves from material wants, needs. You can have material stuff as long as it doesn't control you, then you'll be fine. That's okay. Good. Thank you. Good question. Thank you.
Can a group have an ego?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I'll give you an example. You don't see it so much here, thankfully, but in the UK, with soccer, soccer games, for instance, we get individuals who collect other individuals together through a sort of a negative communion, if you want to call it that, where they play with their egos of feeling strong and powerful. And we have lots of aggressive functions associated with that, when you have one football team's supporters fighting against another football team supporters. And it becomes quite aggressive. And so they collectively create an ego which supports each of the components that are creating the ego. And that ego feels really strong and powerful. And the individuals within that collection, on their own, don't feel powerful. But when they're together, they do feel powerful. So they stay together. And so they understand that they can do much more synergetically. Of course you can, synergetically. They can do much more as a collective ego than they can as an individualized ego. And so that's why a lot of people flock together. I mean, the old saying, birds of a feather flock together, is true for spiritual people, ordinary individuals who are immersed in their incarnation, and those individuals who I would call backfill people, who are sort of lower in the intelligence, but nevertheless doing their thing. So it's very important to ensure that, we do create a sort of a connectedness that boosts one's ego, another's ego, and we start to work together in that way.
In that case, could you describe where the ego would exist? Where is it located? Think of it in terms of the neurons in the brain. Each neuron is individualized, but they're connected. Okay? Energetically and physically, we are individualized, or sentiently, we're individualized. But when we start to collude with each other, we connect ourselves energetically. We allow each other into each other's auric field. And when we do that, we then create this, if you want to call it egoic synapse or brain that starts to create itself as a bigger ego, one that's greater than the sum of its parts. Okay. One over there.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, hi. This is Mary Beth. I talk to you sometimes on Skype.
Hi there.
But I asked you one time via one of our Skype sessions, sometimes when I meditate, I get a dark, thought, like an image. Just sometimes I'll have visions, and sometimes it'll be a dark vision. And I asked you once what that was, and you said it was my ego trying to pull me down because I was going too high up. Or, like the other day, I saw a nail in my eye, and it just kind of shocked me. And I said, cancel, delete, because I didn't want to create that. And it's kind of like it shocked me. So how do you know if you're having vision, if it's coming from your ego or from your higher self? Is there a way to know if it's a dark vision, that automatically means it's the ego?
No. Quite simply, what can be classified as being a benign vision or experience can also be ego. But what you'll find is that it won't feel quite right. Okay? Use your intuition to feel what you're experiencing when you're meditating, when you're traversing the frequencies, in my case, or whether you're doing other spiritual work. Does it feel right? If it feels right, it is right. If it looks right but doesn't feel right, it isn't right. It's as simple as that.
The first vision I ever had I woke up one morning and I saw this horse taking a dump in front of my face. And it was very off-putting, and I felt very insulted. But to me, I understood what that meant. I had a dream book and went and looked it up. But the nail in the eye, I still wasn't quite sure. Is that like telling me something? I really wasn't quite sure.
Yeah.
Is it I'm not trusting my intuition enough, or in touch with it enough?
Did it feel okay?
It felt, when I saw the nail in the eye, when I saw the horse poop, it shocked me, but then I realized that I was starting to have visions because I had a medium tell me like 5 or 6 years ago that I would see that.
Yeah.
The nail in the eye just felt scary, and I wasn't sure.
Okay. Well, let's look at it back to front. When we experience different visions, or with dreams or in meditation, they're usually a translation of what we've experienced in proper, but we haven't got the vocabulary to do anything else other than translate it into what we've experienced in this particular human existence. So the nail in the eye is that your physical existence is getting in the way of your spiritual eye, of seeing things. So you're not seeing things properly. The horse going to the bathroom, okay, is representation of one of your instincts. Animals are instincts. Getting rid of its trash, its rubbish. So one of your instincts is dumping its trash. So what you've got there is that although you're not seeing it properly, the nail in the eye, part of you is getting rid of its rubbish, which is good. Yeah? We're always getting rid of our baggage. Another way of saying it's baggage, okay? We're always getting rid of our baggage. And when we have visualizations such as that, it's saying that some part of us has shed something baggage, some spiritual baggage which is holding us back. Okay, good.
Well, seeing as how we're on visions and how they represent where we are with our ego, I have to share mine. I saw a dragon, and I was running away from it, and of course I was worried that the dragon was trying to eat me and destroy me and so on and so forth, and I had my other warrior angel selves and higher selves with me, and they were battling the dragon. They had different weapons and stuff. And then all of a sudden, the other parts of me, the higher selves parts of me, decided to converse with the dragon, and they started being friends, and I was still cowering in the corner and being afraid of this dragon. And then when I woke up out of that, I realized that the dragon is the ego. And I realized once I became friends and trusted the universe, then the dragon would not be a threat. It wants to be a friend.
It's still there, but you'll have to make sure it doesn't get out of its cage. We can use the ego to good effect. I think it's the front here. So we can use the ego to good effect as well. I mean, we can't exist without it. So we have to be able to work with some parts of it that help us. For instance, one of the things the ego can do for us is give us confidence, okay, and make us feel we got self-worth. So we can use those in a controlled way to help us in times of difficulty when we have a challenging role to play or a job to do. So, although I've painted a rather sticky picture of the ego, if we are working reasonably with it, but we still keep our eye on it, we can use it to good effect as well. It can help us in sticky times. I think this is the last one, Julia, yeah.
That's kind of like what I was thinking. Given the fact that we're all aware before we come in, we know the ego is going to be here. It's almost the price we pay for the ticket to be incarnate. So the fact that it is an adversary, or it's always presented as an adversary, is that the only role it has? It sounds like you can say it also is a teacher in a sense of expressing things.
Yeah, we will evolve as a result of our management of the ego, so to speak, yeah. Another function of incarnation is being addicted to the sensory stimuli and thoughts, behaviours and actions associated with low frequency existence, what's called karma. And so you've got a number of different things that we know we're going to get into. One is loss of who we are temporarily through low frequency interaction. The other one is this temporary personality trying to rule the roost, and the other one is the possibility of being addicted to being here. And so we are fully conversant and fully aware what's going to happen to us. And some of us are better prepared with dealing with it than others. It just depends upon how evolved we are and how we react with it. Okay. Well, I think that's it, isn't it, Julia? Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody? Okay. Well, we've got a few. Okay, we can have a few more questions. Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to make you all miss your bathroom break.
Hi. This is a two-part question.
Part one.
Part one. Did you mention Master Yogananda as not having an ego, or
He would say he had an ego.
He would? Okay.
Yeah, he would. Yes.
Okay.
Because you have to have an ego to be incarnate.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you've got to the point where you've not got an ego, there's no point in being here. You've mastered incarnation. And so you would just dissolve the body and go back to the energetic.
I agree. I'm a follower of Master Yogananda. You mentioned backfill people, and I was wondering if you had talked to Dolores about the backfill people, which is off topic, I realize, but
yeah.
I've been discussing with my friends, my girlfriends, about the backdrop people, and we've been playing with the idea all weekend long, and so it's kind of fun.
A couple of years ago, when Dolores was here, we had a similar, actually, an end of conference questions and answers session, and we talked about that, didn't we, Julia? About the back, and we had two things: backfill and backdrop, right? And they're two different things. The backdrop was what Dolores had discovered, was to do with, if you like, support actors in our localized space. You know? We are interacting within our own event space, whether it's parallelized or not, as the case may be. And these individuals in the background just filling the spaces in. Yeah? On some films, you see like a landscape at the back, but the rest of the film is being done on a stage. In the old days, you could tell the difference really easily, but you can't these days because they got blue screen technology and actually bring in live images. But the backdrop people would be these temporary individuals that our higher self creates to fill in the gaps. And the higher self of others also create to fill in the gaps. And so we have individuals who are real incarnate individuals going about their incarnate business, and in the background, rather than having blue space, so to speak, there's these images of individuals who are there. The backfill people are a different thing altogether. The backfill people are a necessary requirement to allow a balance to be maintained whilst those souls who are ascending go into the next frequency level, what Dolores called the New Earth, and allowing those individuals who are still struggling to get to that point to do it without noticing drastic reductions in population. And so there's another genre of soul being allowed to incarnate and have individualized free will that wouldn't normally have incarnated with individualized free will, to come in and backfill for those individuals who've ascended. So the rest of us can move upwards without concern as to what's happening into the population of the environment around us. Okay. Thank you. I think that's it, Julia. Okay.
Good.
Yeah.